Hello everyone, in this video I want to give you an overview of the Äußerung zum Thema, which is the first written question in the Leaving Cert higher level paper. I want to look at the difference between the A and B Äußerung. I want to look at how you might describe the picture and some tips for that. We want to look then about how you would answer the follow-up questions. Then we want to look at how the Äußerung zum Thema is marked in an exam situation. And finally we want to consider some common pitfalls that will help you to get a better mark. So let's get into it. The Äußerung zum Thema means extension of the theme. And in this class, I'll be looking at a specific example, and that is the 2019 Äußerung zum Thema. As you can see here, the two titles you're given are die Welt reisen, and then the B one is Klassentreffen. So the topics here have to do with traveling, and that's not a surprise because if you look back at the theme of the text 2, which comes just before the Äußerung zum Thema, you'll note that it's about a young man called Christopher who travels around the world, and his story is told in text 2. So Äußerung zum Thema again means extension of the theme, and it's going to be about something around the theme that was discussed in the second text. So if the second text is about sport, the Äußerung zum Thema will be something to do with sport. If it's about health and fitness, it'll be something to do with health and fitness. If it's about some other aspect of life, then that should be reflected in the Äußerung zum Thema. Now, the Äußerung zum Thema is 25 marks, as is noted here, and that is 6.25% of all of the marks in your Leaving Cert German exam, which is a considerable sum and could easily be the difference between a grade if it came down to that. So, along with the angewandte Grammatik and then the schriftliche Produktion, which is the letter or the other picture written question, this combines to give 25% of your total marks for Leaving Cert German. I would say, firstly, sometimes people ask about the 100 Wörter there. I would say just ignore that. That really is just for people who might write very little. You really want to aim in this question to answer as much as possible for each of these three questions or three groups of questions that you have in the Äußerung zum Thema. So firstly, we just want to consider what is the difference between the A and the B question, or is there a difference? Maybe you have done lots of these Äußerung zum Themas already and you've never considered this. Well, as a rule of thumb, the first Äußerung zum Thema tends to be more directly linked to the text. So we do see here that we have the first title, which is die Welt reisen. You can see that. And then when you come down to the second one, it's Klassentreffen. So both of these have to do with, I suppose, an activity that here in this context you have young people involved in. But the first one is more specifically to do with the text. And what I find is, and this is just my perception of it, but I find that the first one, because the theme is a little bit more constricted and you have less freedom maybe in your answers, or the theme is really narrower, it can be a little bit more difficult. If you don't have a lot of vocabulary on this theme of travel or meeting people, then you'll probably find that the first one is maybe a little trickier to answer than the second. The second one here is Klassentreffen, and there are a couple of questions in the B and the C part of that about organizing a meetup, we'll say, of a class or a class reunion. What would you do, and so on. And the last part in staying in contact with school friends. Now, I remember when I first started to do Äußerung zum Thema, this question that we find here, beschreiben Sie das Foto in 3 bis 4 Sätzen. I was quite thrown by that question because I always used to think, what will happen if a picture comes up and I just don't know a word for a key item in the picture? I will be at sea. I won't know how to answer this question. I'll be off to a bad start. But really, what I picked up as I started to practice was that you can learn some phrases, some key phrases that will help you to get out of these kind of tricky situations. And the phrases that I have in mind will be phrases like im Hintergrund, which is in the background, im Vordergrund, in the foreground, auf der linken Seite, auf der rechten Seite. Those sorts of phrases are really key to giving you a bit of leverage in how you answer the question. And also knowing the word for man, der Mann, or woman, die Frau, der Junge, boy, das Mädchen, girl, being able to describe people's appearance and how they look, whether they're happy or sad. These are really very key phrases that you should know, and really you can apply to any situation. So the secret with the Äußerung zum Thema is answering with correct, short, simple sentences. You don't have to be an expert in science. You don't need to know complicated words that you might find difficult, even something like cardboard or that sort of thing. You don't, to answer this question, really need to know those. You need to be able to say there's a man, there's a boy, the boy is happy, the boy is excited. Those sort of questions, those sort of answers, that's really what gets you the marks here. So without further ado, let's jump into a sample description of this image. So we see here that there are two men in the picture, or definitely a man on the left and then a boy on the right, but you could say there are two men in the picture. So to do that, you just want to say in the picture, which is auf dem Bild. Okay, let's just get a clearer font there. So auf dem Bild sehe ich zwei Männer. So here the key phrase really is auf dem Bild, which means in the picture. And then you have sehe ich zwei Männer. So just be careful there that the verb comes in second place. And then with the plural of man as well, der Mann, die Männer. And then looking back at the image, we could say that the man on the left hand side is Christopher Schacht. You can see that the second question here makes reference to Christopher Schacht, and he's the character from the text. So you could say here that the man on the left is probably Christopher Schacht. So that would be simply der Mann. And this is a nice little phrase, auf der linken Seite. So again, a lovely little phrase to throw in. You can see he's on the left hand side of the picture. This is Christopher Schacht. So der Mann auf der linken Seite ist. Now a nice word to throw in here would be the word wahrscheinlich, which means probably. Wahrscheinlich. And then Christopher, I'll just say Christ for this class, Schacht. Now this brings us to perhaps, I mean, you could say he looks happy. You could say there's a boy on the right hand side. If you want to, perhaps if you have the vocabulary to say something that's more obvious, you could say that both of them are holding posters in their hands. And to say that, we would just say, so we just look back here and we'd say beide, which is German for both. So beide haben Plakate. So Plakat is like a poster in their hand. So there's no need to say anything other than that. That's a simple way of saying both have posters in their hands. Now, a very easy, what I would call perhaps a hack when you're describing these photos or these pictures is to talk about somebody's emotions. How do the people look? And just learn off the basics of those. For example, glücklich, happy, traurig, sad, aufgeregt, begeistert, and so on. So in this picture we look at these two men, and we could say that both of them look happy and optimistic. So that would be simply sie sehen. So sie sehen glücklich und optimistisch, and then aus at the end. Now it's critical here that you understand through and also practice as you do these that the verb aussehen, which means to appear or to look, is a separable verb. This part obviously stays here, and the prefix goes to the end of the sentence. And don't forget that prefix. It's very like the verb to get on with in German. Ich komme gut mit meiner Schwester aus. Students tend to forget the aus at the end, so be careful that you don't do that in this sentence. And finally, we could just use another one of our sort of hack phrases, which would be in the background. So looking at this photo, I mean, it's open to debate, but when we look at the background to this photo, you can see that there's a sign here and there is some kind of building here. So it's not entirely clear, but it's likely that this building is, you could say, a filling station. Certainly you can say there's a building in the background. And I'll show you how you might say something a little bit more complicated. So we can start off with in the background, im Hintergrund. Now this is one of the phrases, again, I would use. Im Hintergrund really help you to expand the options open to you. Im Hintergrund sieht man ein Gebäude. So in the background, one sees a building, comma. Now what's nice to say here is that is perhaps a filling station. We're not sure. We're looking at it and we're not sure whether it's a filling station. It does look like a Shell oil sign or that sticking up in the air. So to use that, we want to use a relative pronoun. Again, you don't have to do this, but it's just a very nice thing for an examiner to read. That would be das, because you're referring back to the ein Gebäude here. Das vielleicht, which means perhaps, eine Tankstelle ist. Tankstelle being petrol station, and you've been very careful here and you've put the verb to the end of the sentence, das vielleicht eine Tankstelle ist. So looking back over that answer, they asked us to describe the photo in 3 to 4 sentences. It's always very wise to give 5, maybe even 6 if you can, but 4 to 5 certainly, because you get discretionary marks, which we'll talk about in a moment, for extra sentences, extra correct sentences that you use to describe the picture. So moving on then to the follow-up questions, what I call the follow-up questions, which are the second and third groups. These are on a related theme to the picture. In this question we read here, Sie treffen Christopher Schacht auf einer Reise. Now you'd have to have known that that means you meet Christopher Schacht on a trip. Welche Frage stellen Sie ihm? So eine Frage stellen is to put a question or to ask a question to somebody. Schreiben Sie 4 Fragen. A couple of observations here. The most important one is that you look here at the pronoun and it's a C, which is has a capital S on it and it's in bold. What they're doing here, they're being very fair. The SEC is telling you that you're being asked to put questions to Christopher Schacht. It's not the they pronoun. It's nothing to do with they. It's you asking Christopher Schacht questions in direct speech. So they just want you to have questions like, how old are you? Perhaps where are you from? They can be simple questions, but they have to be in that format, direct questions that you are asking to Christopher Schacht. So we're asked here to write 4 questions. So let's do that to start us off. So you could, just to show the examiner, this is just totally optional, but just to show the examiner that you know exactly what you're doing and that you're speaking to Christopher and asking Christopher these questions, you could say, hello, Christopher. So let me just write this in blue so that you can see we're on to the second part here. So here you could just say, hello, Christopher. You won't get any marks for this, but it's just a nice way to start. Now, a really basic, let's keep these questions really simple. And you should have practice with asking your classmate questions in German. You might say to them, wie alt bist du? Here, because you don't know Christopher, it's probably better to use the informal. So you would say, wie alt sind Sie? How old are you? Now, Christopher travelled around the world. So you could ask Christopher, was it fun to travel around the world? Now be careful here because you want to put that question in the past tense. You don't want to say, is it fun? You could say, is it fun? But it's nicer to say, was it fun to travel around the world? The way you would do that is you would just say, hat es Spaß gemacht, die Welt zu reisen. So notice what you're doing here. You've taken the verb, let's say, and always with questions in German, sometimes it's a good idea to switch it around. If you had said, it was fun, it would be, es hat Spaß gemacht. When you put that into question, you're just putting the hat first. So, hat es Spaß gemacht. Then you have your comma, to travel around the world, die Welt zu reisen. Now, another question you could ask Christopher is, which land is your favorite, or which land is your favorite country? Which country is your favorite? So here we can just say, welches Land ist, and then your is the possessive pronoun for the informal, which is I with a capital H, or capital I's rather, I-H-R, and then Lieblingsland. Welches Land ist Ihr Lieblingsland? So now we've written 3 questions. We want to get to 4, possibly even 5. We'll throw in a 5th one as well. So we could say here, you could ask Christopher, how many new friends has he made? And in German, you're better off to use the verb to get to know people. So how many new people did you get to know? Rather than asking, have you made friends? Because you can't say that in German. So we'll say, wie viele neue Leute. So wie viele is how many. And question words are really important here, that you know your question words. And they're on that little sheet on handouts.ie, which I'll link in the description. But wie viele neue Leute haben Sie? Now a nice little word to throw in here will be all in all, which is insgesamt. And then finally our past participle, which is kennengelernt. So how many new people did you get to know altogether? Now then, if you wanted to be to really show off your German, you could ask him, would you go on such a trip again? So to the best of my knowledge, Christopher in the story talks about a trip that he took around the world with very little money. And you could ask him, would you go on such a trip again? This is nice to do because you're showing the examiner that you have full command of the conditional tense, which is an easy tense to get the hang of in German. So here, why not show the examiner that you know that tense, and that would be würden Sie. And again, this is a fifth question throwing in just in case one of the other questions wasn't accepted as valid. So würden Sie eine solche Reise once again, noch einmal. And as you know with the conditional tense, when you use würden, you need to follow that. That's the would part, would you. You need to follow that with the do at the end. Would you do such a trip again? Würden Sie eine solche Reise noch einmal machen? At the very end. So that brings us to the end of the second part here, Schreiben Sie 4 Fragen. In just a moment we'll look at how this will be marked and how you would do in the marking with an answer like that. But for the moment, let's go on to the next group of questions, which is here, allein ohne Eltern, ohne Freunde die Welt reisen. Würden Sie das machen? Warum oder warum nicht? And then here, 4 Sätze. So here you need to write 4 sentences again. The question is, alone, without parents, without friends, traveling around the world, would you do that, and why or why not? Now, with a question like this, you might be tempted first to say, I'm going to give the most truthful answer I can here, but you're really asked here to show and demonstrate your knowledge of German. And when you think about it, you might not go on such a trip around the world, but probably the easiest answer to give here is that yes, you would go on such a trip around the world. Because when you say I would, then you can say that it would be fun. You can say I would get to know lots of new people. You can say it would be a challenge, and so on. So always, when it comes to a question like this, which is in the conditional tense, would you do this, would you do that, you can sit on the fence, you can say I would or I wouldn't, but it's actually not advisable to do that in a context like this. Try and give it, you put your best foot forward and say, well, how much German do I have to answer that I would, or to answer that I would not? In this context, I think it's easier to say, ich würde das machen, I would do that. So let's just jump in and answer on the paper here. So let's go back to the black pen. So we could start off by saying, I would certainly do that. Yes, absolutely, I would certainly do that. So that would just be, ich würde das bestimmt machen. A nice little phrase to throw in here, which you might have learned, is that traveling educates, or it opens one's eyes. So that's just the word reisen, and then bildet. So traveling educates. Now a lovely little phrase that you may have learned in the conditional tense is it would be. You can say it would be great, and that is just simply es wäre. You can just say it would be great, toll, or you can say es wäre großartig. It would be great, it would be fantastic. Now, I'm answering this question in the conditional tense, which is the most natural tense to answer it in. You could have perhaps answered it in a different tense, but this is the best way to answer this question. So you could follow this up by saying that you could get to know new people. So why not write that down? So man, and it's nice here to use the man könnte, which is like man kann, one can, but you're saying one could, because it's an if situation. So man könnte neue Leute. So again, we're using this little phrase about getting to know new people. Man könnte neue Leute kennenlernen. And again, another little phrase that you might have learned before is to see something from another perspective. Now, this is entirely optional and it's really showing off your German if you can use these little phrases. But if you want to do really well, if you want to hit 25 out of 25, it's advisable to have these little Redewendungen or kleine Ausdrücke, nützliche Ausdrücke that will really impress the examiner. And you can learn off some of these, memorize them and apply them, use them in your everyday German as much as you can. So this phrase we're going to use here is just says, and man könnte neue Leute kennenlernen, man könnte etwas. So one could, etwas is something, aus einem anderen Blickwinkel sehen. And this phrase here it's just a lovely little phrase. Entschuldigung. So this phrase here is just a lovely little phrase to see everything from something from a different perspective. To see something from a different perspective. That's what examiners love to read. Now, you could say, to continue on, it would also be a great challenge. So again, we can write here, es wäre auch also eine große, or just eine Herausforderung. So you can say it would be a challenge, but I would get to learn or experience a lot about other countries firsthand. So that's simply, aber ich würde much über andere Länder aus erster Hand erfahren. So that's just erfahren. And a lovely phrase just to throw in at the end. You certainly don't need to with this level of German, but you could just throw in and say that would be worth it. And that's a reflexive verb in German. And that is simply das würde sich lohnen. So here we've certainly answered the question. Would you do this or would you not? You've given 4 reasons, and it's very important in a question like this that you specifically answer the question you're asked. Make sure you read it very carefully. Here you've said that travel educates. You've said it would be great. You've said one could get to know new people. You've said that one can see something from a different perspective. We're at 4 there probably already. Then you've said it would be a challenge. Again, that's another one. That you would learn about other countries firsthand. That's another one. And then it would be worth it. So you're really throwing in, you're going above and beyond in answering the question that you're asked. So that brings us then to the marking of the Äußerung zum Thema. How is an Äußerung zum Thema really marked? And there's a set marking process that's followed every year. So let's just take our red pen now and have a look at how this would be marked. So the first thing to understand about the Äußerung zum Thema is that it's marked. There's a 2-track process. The first one is that you're marked on your content. So I'll just put that down at the bottom here, where an examiner would. That is going to be a C. You'll see a C like this, and that stands for the word content. Then you have, you'll see an E, which will stand for the word expression. Now, what do these content and expression mean? Well, content is to do with answering the question. If you've answered the question, no matter if you've answered it imperfectly, you will get a mark for answering the question. Now, there are some limitations to that. The sentence must have a verb, but if the verb ending was incorrect, but it's still clear what you're saying, then you will get a content mark. And the content marks in this particular Äußerung zum Thema, and generally speaking, are 13. And I'll explain how we get this number in a moment. The expression mark is to do with the accuracy of your German. So really this comes down, generally speaking, to grammar. And I'll just write that over the side here. So with grammar, there are a number of different areas to be cognizant of. I would say at the top of the list you have WO, which is word order. So if you make a mistake in word order, you'll have 2 lines under the mistake, and over in the margin on the left hand side, the examiner will write WO, which stands for word order. There are other things to be aware of here. T, so that you've used the correct tenses. If you've answer the question that's in the past tense in the present or vice versa, then that would be a tense error. Just be careful as well of capitals. So for example, if you spelled the word, let's say house, with a small h, then there'll be a line under that h, because that's an error with capitals. And there are other spellings. You could, for example, have a spelling. There could be something that's not intelligible to the examiner. But also what comes into this bracket here is when you have a strong student is if you've answered it really well, if you've used a lot of colourful German. If you said something really nice, you might find that there would be a plus in the margin on the left hand side. And that's an example of really idiomatic, colourful German being used to answer the question. So the expression marks are 12, and there are various bands that you must fall into to get a good expression mark. So where does the 13 come from? Well, let's go back and see how this would be marked. So in the first question, you were asked to describe the photo in 3 to 4 sentences. So the way this is done is I have a first sentence here, and that is going to be A1. So you are given 3 content marks for this first section. So we've said that there are 2 men. Ich sehe 2 Männer. Der Mann auf der linken Seite ist wahrscheinlich Chris. So we've given a second point because we described the picture in a second sentence. And then we've said that they hold posters in their hands. So that's a third point. Now, there are only 3 content marks for this paragraph, but what happens is you get what are called these discretionary marks. And there are only 2 of them to be given away. And those are extra points. They can be extra points that you would write, good sentences answering the question that you would write in any of the 3 paragraphs. So we here, for example, said that they look happy and optimistic, so we will get an extra mark for that. I'm going to put down there an A+1. And then we see that in the background there is a building. Again, because that's a full sentence, even though it's just a clause in this context, it's enough to give you an extra mark or discretionary mark. So that brings us to the end of paragraph 1. So that will be marked as A3 plus 2. You've got your 3 content marks for answering the question, and then you've picked up 2 discretionary marks. Or you've got both of your discretionary marks in that paragraph. That brings us to the next question, the 4 questions you would ask Christopher. Well, we've asked him 1 question here. How old are you? Hat es Spaß gemacht? That's another question. A 3rd question, which country would be your favourite? And a 4th question, how many people did you get to know? Now there's another question there, but we've already used up our discretionary mark, so we'll just put a bracket around that, but this mark here would total 4. So they were the total marks that were going for that paragraph. It's the same thing with the last one. Would you go on such a trip? You said I certainly would. That's 1 sentence. Travel educates. It would be brilliant. 3rd sentence. 4th sentence, one could get to know new people. And that gives us our 4th mark here. So we pick that up there, and that gives us a total of C4 there. So that's 4 and 4 is 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So we hit our 13 mark there, and we get 13 marks out of 13. Now you may ask, is there context on which you wouldn't get a mark? Well, for example, if you had said something like, if you had said, I would do that, but then you hadn't really answered the question. Maybe you had started to talk about Christopher again, or you just had run out of vocabulary in answering why you would take such a trip, then you wouldn't have got the content marks for that paragraph. This brings us on then to the expression mark. So when we look back over this text, you can see that there is very little wrong with it. Maybe you can see some mistakes, but I can't see any mistakes here. If there was a word order mistake, you would have, for example, 2 lines. Let's say, for example, I had said here, auf dem Bild, ich sehe 2 Männer. What happened then in that context is an examiner would put 2 lines under the sehe, and he or she would write over in the side here, WO, which is word order. Now, we know in this context there aren't any mistakes there, so we can get rid of that. But that's what would happen in that context. Looking over this, we can see that there are some nice phrases. For example, this one in particular, where you say you're used to the conditional tense, arise and build it. That's very nice. Let's put a plus in the margin here to see something from another perspective. Again, that's very nice. It would be a challenge, or it would be worth it. Again, those are nice, very nice phrases. So looking at this, it is up to the examiner's discretion how they might score it here, but we will just say that the full marks of 12 out of 12 are justified. Now, it is difficult to get full marks here. If you make any mistakes at all, particularly serious mistakes will be word order. You're expected at this level to have practiced these enough that you don't make word order mistakes. And I always say to students, no matter how good you think you are, after you've written it, go back over it with a fine comb and check it. Give yourself time to check your Äußerung zum Thema, and you will be glad for it, because generally, none of us are perfect, and generally you will find that you've made a mistake somewhere, and correcting that mistake makes such a difference. It just means one less red mark on your finished product. So this brings us then to the final section of this class, which is common pitfalls. And with the Äußerung zum Thema, there aren't really that many common pitfalls. If I were to pick two, I would say that one is students not being able to describe the photo well. So throughout senior cycle, you should have plenty of experience of using those generic phrases, I would call them, like in the background, in the foreground, on the left hand side, on the right hand side. The man looks tired, the woman looks happy. Those kind of phrases it's so easy for you to pick up marks and give a perfect answer to that first common question, beschreiben Sie das Foto in 3 bis 4 Sätzen. So I would say that's one common pitfall. The other one is of more relevance to stronger students, and that would be just to be very careful to answer the question. And I'll give you an example of how that can be really serious. If we look, for example, at the 2021 Äußerung zum Thema question. So this would be, again, if you go down to after the second text, you will see here that you're given this question was quite would be one of the options, the B part here, which was Lust auf Gastfamilie. And here you were asked in the second part. So again, the first part is your generic question, beschreiben Sie das Foto in 3 bis 4 Sätzen. But here you were asked in the second part of this question, warum hat es für das Sprachenlernen Vorteile, in einer Gastfamilie zu wohnen? And this means, why does it have advantages for language learning to live in a host or with a host family? And what you needed to do here was to say why there were advantages to living with a host family for language learning. If you just said it's lots of fun, you wouldn't have got the content mark there. So it was quite critical here that you read the question really, really carefully, and you really engage with that part, für das Sprachenlernen, that part there. That was really, really important. And again on this question, another rather tricky question was the second part here, which said, Jobben und Reisen, was halten Sie von diesem Konzept? So, was halten Sie von diesem Konzept is, what do you think of this concept, which is the concept of having a job and traveling simultaneously or at the same time. And again, what was really necessary here was that you engage that idea of having a job and traveling at the same time. If you just answered about traveling, the traveling Reisen bildet, or man kann Geld verdienen, if you're talking about the job, but you didn't connect, you didn't combine. So if you just talked about one aspect or another, but you didn't combine both of them in your answer, then there was a potential that you wouldn't get the content mark on this question, because you really weren't engaging with the specific question that was being asked. So I would say be very careful with that, and that brings us back to this answer. Hopefully you found that short breakdown useful. I would recommend that you take a look now at the second part, which is the Klassentreffen, and see can you answer that second option there on the Äußerung zum Thema. If you're interested in doing some more revision, you can have a look at this video here that shows the answering of text 1 and some tips on that. But I hope you found it really useful. If you have any questions, you can pop them in the chat, and I'll see you the next time. Bye bye.